If you bring me everything you have on him, she said, standing in my doorway at 11 on a Tuesday night, I can end this in 60 days. But you have to trust me completely, and you can't tell anyone I was here. I stood there holding the door like an idiot, rain dripping off her jacket onto my welcome mat, and I thought, I don't even know your name. She said, I'm his sister. And I've been watching him destroy people for 3 years. You're next on the list. But you don't have to be the last. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 31 years old, and 8 months ago, I was the co-owner of a mid-sized construction firm in Beaumont, Texas. We did commercial builds, warehouses, medical offices, the occasional school renovation. Nothing glamorous, but solid. My father built that company from nothing, and when he retired, he handed it to me and my business partner, who had been my closest friend since college. I'll call him my partner, because that's what he was on paper. In every other sense of the word, he was something I still don't have a clean name for. My wife and I had been married for 4 years. We met at a contractors expo in Houston. She was working for a vendor, sharp and funny and completely unlike anyone I'd dated before. We got married fast, maybe too fast, my mother said, but I didn't listen. I was in love in the way that makes you stupid and certain at the same time. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. We talked about kids. I thought I was building something that would last. I found out about the two of them the way you find out about most things you don't want to know, by accident, on an ordinary Wednesday. I had left my laptop at the office. I went back after dinner to grab it and saw my partner's car still in the lot, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that my wife's car was parked beside it with the lights off. I sat in my truck for a while, engine running, telling myself there was an explanation. She hadn't mentioned stopping by. She had no reason to be there after 7 on a Wednesday. But I told myself a story I could live with, drove home, and didn't say anything. That was my mistake. Not the silence, the believing. I kept believing for another 4 months. By the time I stopped believing, I had already started noticing things without meaning to. A hotel charge on a shared account that she explained away. A work trip my partner took to Dallas that had no corresponding invoice in our system. A shift in how she talked to me, still kind, still functional, but with a kind of careful distance. Like someone who had already started packing but hadn't told you yet. When she finally left, it wasn't a fight. She sat me down on a Sunday morning, coffee going cold between us, and told me she hadn't been happy for a long time. She said she needed space to figure things out. She did not say his name. I did not say it either. We were both very polite about the whole disaster. She was out of the house by Thursday. I cried once, alone in the garage, for about 20 minutes, and then I didn't again. I think part of me had already done the grieving in those 4 months of choosing not to look. By the time it was official, there was almost a strange relief in it, like finally being allowed to acknowledge the wound. I went back to work. My partner was sympathetic. He brought coffee to our morning meetings. He asked how I was holding up. He said, "You'll get through this, man. You always do." I looked at him across the conference table and nodded and said, "Thank you, and I want you to understand I still didn't know for certain. I suspected, but suspicion is not proof, and I had a company to run." That's when the money started not adding up. It started small. A materials invoice from a supplier I didn't recognize. A subcontractor payment that had no matching work order. I flagged them to our bookkeeper, who got nervous and quiet in a way that told me she already knew something was wrong. When I pressed her, she handed me a printout of 6 months of transactions she had been tracking on her own. Then she said, "I didn't know who to tell," and started crying. I took the printout home and sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours going through it line by line. The amounts were not small. Money had been moving out of the company through a web of vendor payments to companies I had never heard of. My signature was on some of the approvals, except I had never signed them. Someone had been using a digital copy of my signature, the kind you generate when you sign a PDF. Whoever set this up knew our systems. Whoever set this up had been inside the company for a long time. My partner had been inside the company for 8 years. I did not call the police that night. I didn't call anyone. I poured a glass of water I didn't drink and sat very still and tried to understand the shape of what I was looking at. It was too large to see all at once. It kept shifting depending on where I put my eyes. I went to work the next morning and acted normal. I smiled at the right moments. I signed what he put in front of me and made mental notes of everything. I started taking photographs of documents on my phone. I didn't know what I was building toward, but I knew that once I moved, I would only get one chance, and I couldn't afford to move wrong. She came to my door 6 days later. His sister. I had met her twice, once at a company picnic 4 years ago and once briefly at his wedding. She was quieter than I remembered. Steadier. She came in and sat at my kitchen table and laid a folder down between us like she was presenting evidence at a deposition. "How much do you know?" she asked. I told her about the invoices, the forged signatures, the vendor companies. She nodded slowly. There are 3 of those shell companies, she said. All registered in Nevada. All tied to a single LLC that he controls. Your name is listed as a co-owner on 2 of them. You signed the paperwork or someone signed it for you 18 months ago. I stared at her. I never signed anything like that. I know, she said. That's the point. She explained it the way someone explains something they've had a long time to understand. Her brother had been doing this before I ever knew him. A company in Baton Rouge in his late 20s, a former employer who found discrepancies after he left and couldn't prove anything cleanly enough to prosecute. A real estate partnership in New Mexico that collapsed under circumstances that were never fully explained. He was careful and patient, and he never moved fast enough to trigger alarms before he was already positioned to walk away clean. He picks partners who trust him, she said. That's the criteria. Not smart or stupid. Just people who genuinely trust him. I asked her how she knew all of this. She looked at me for a moment before answering. Because he did it to our father first. That's where he learned the pattern. She said it flatly, without drama, the way you say something you have had years to metabolize. I've been trying to find someone with enough legal standing to open a federal investigation for 2 years. Every time I get close, there's not enough documentation. Or the victim doesn't want to go on record. Or the case gets complicated by jurisdiction. But you're a current co-owner. Your signature is forged on federal business filings. That's wire fraud. That's identity theft. That crosses state lines because Nevada is the registration state. You have standing that nobody else has had. I asked her why she was bringing this to me instead of going directly to a federal investigator herself. She said, because I already tried that. 18 months ago, an agent opened a preliminary inquiry and was told to stand down. Someone my brother knows applied pressure from above. The agent still wants to reopen it. She's been waiting for a complainant with clean standing and documented losses. That's you. But only if we do this carefully. I looked at the folder on my table. Then I looked at her. She wasn't asking me to trust her blindly, she was giving me information and letting me decide what to do with it. That distinction mattered to me. I said, tell me what carefully looks like. What it looked like was the most uncomfortable 6 weeks of my life. We did not report anything. Not yet. She explained that the moment we filed, he would know, and he had already demonstrated the ability to apply pressure and make cases go sideways. If we moved too soon, we'd hand him time to transfer assets, destroy records, and reframe the narrative with me as a disgruntled partner making accusations. We needed him to keep moving, because people in the middle of a scheme always generate more evidence when they think they're safe. So I went to work. I ran my meetings. I reviewed my partner's project reports and asked normal questions about timelines and budgets. I kept my expression neutral while he updated me on subcontractor schedules, knowing that at least a portion of what he was telling me was fiction built on top of theft. It was like learning to walk differently every step, deliberate, nothing automatic. His sister and I met twice a week at a diner 40 minutes outside Beaumont. She would bring printed documents. I would bring photographs from my phone. We built a timeline together on a legal pad: dates, amounts, corresponding shell company transactions, the forged signature approvals. She had a forensic accountant friend who was reviewing the financials off the books, as a personal favor, not yet officially. The picture that emerged was precise and ugly. Over 14 months, approximately $340,000 had been moved out of our company through fraudulent vendor payments. An additional $80,000 had been drawn against a line of credit secured against company assets, a line of credit I had not authorized and had not known existed until his sister showed me the application. My social security number was on that application. I had not put it there. On top of the financial fraud, there were the business registration documents, 2 LLCs in Nevada. My name listed as a member manager, signed with my forged signature. Those companies had been used to receive some of the diverted funds. If this fell apart badly, I was not just the victim. I was potentially the named co-defendant in a fraud case built on documents bearing my name. That was the design. I understood it fully the night his sister spread the documents across the diner table and showed me the sequence. My partner would keep moving money until the moment the company's finances became indefensible, then declare a business crisis, and point to the Nevada LLCs where my name appeared as the source of the mismanagement. My wife leaving had been part of clearing the field. Remove the person who might ask questions at home, leave the partner isolated and destabilized at work, then pull the financial rug while he's off balance. By the time anyone looked closely, I'd be buried under my own name. I remember sitting across from his sister in that diner at 9:30 on a Thursday night, the food cold between us, and feeling something that was not quite fear and not quite anger. It was something more like clarity, the specific, terrible clarity of understanding exactly how much danger you were already in before you knew to be afraid. He's been moving faster lately, she said. I think he's planning to exit within 90 days. I asked her what we needed to do. She said, we need him to make one more move. A big one. Something we can hand to a federal investigator as the centerpiece, not just supporting evidence, but the act itself, in real time. I asked her how we make that happen. She said, we don't. We just have to stop preventing it. There was a company property up for sale, a commercial lot we owned jointly that had been listed for 8 months without movement. My partner had been pushing to drop the price and close the sale. I had been slow-walking my approval, stalling on the paperwork without explaining why. His sister said, give him the approval. Let the sale move forward. The proceeds were supposed to go into the company operating account. She believed he intended to divert them through one of the Nevada LLCs before they ever landed. If he did that, it was wire fraud on a documented transaction. Federal, clean, incontestable. I signed the approval on a Monday morning. My partner looked relieved in a way he was almost successful at hiding. He shook my hand. He said, good call. This'll give us some breathing room. I nodded and said I hoped so. The sale closed 3 weeks later. The proceeds, $218,000, were wired to an account I did not recognize. His sister got confirmation from the forensic accountant within 48 hours. The account was a fourth shell company, one we hadn't found before. Registered in Delaware. No connection to either of our names on the surface, but traceable through a chain of beneficial ownership documents that his sister had already obtained through a separate legal inquiry. That night, she called the federal investigator she had spoken to 18 months before. The investigator said, send me everything. I went to the field office in Houston 3 days later. I sat across from a woman who had a quiet, focused energy. The kind that makes you feel like she's been thinking about this specific problem for a long time and is choosing her words carefully because she intends to use them somewhere that matters. She went through the documents slowly. She asked clarifying questions. At the end, she looked at me and said, we have enough to open. Are you prepared for this to become real? I said yes. It became real. The next 4 weeks were a controlled silence. I know now that a federal fraud investigation moves on its own timeline, completely apart from anything you can see or feel from the outside. I went to work. I answered emails. I reviewed project updates. My partner talked about Q4 projections like a man with no reason for concern, and I listened and nodded and thought about the forensic accountant's report sitting in a federal file in Houston. My wife reached out during that period. A text, casual and light, asking how I was doing. Then, a few days later, another one warmer, a little nostalgic. Then an email suggesting we should talk, that she'd been thinking, that she felt like we'd both been through a lot and maybe there was something worth revisiting. I read each one carefully. Then I forwarded them to the investigator, because his sister had told me to document any contact from either of them in the weeks before an action. The investigator's reply was brief, noted. They may be aware of movement. Don't respond. I didn't. The morning of the arrests, I was at a job site reviewing framing progress on a medical office build in Orange County. My phone buzzed with a text from his sister. One word. Done. I stood there in a hard hat on a concrete slab, sawdust in the air, the crew working around me, and I read that one word 4 times. My partner was taken from our office at 10:15 that morning. He had been in a meeting with a subcontractor. The agents waited until the subcontractor left. They were polite and efficient, the way people are when they've rehearsed the moment many times. My wife was picked up at the apartment she'd been renting since she left our house. She had a flight booked for the following Tuesday, destination undefined on the documents they found, which the investigator would later describe as consistent with planned flight risk. The charges against her were narrower than his, but they were real: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, filing false business documents, and accessory to identity theft for the forged signature approvals, which her phone's cloud account showed she had photographed and transmitted. She had not been having an affair that became a betrayal. She had been recruited into a betrayal that became an affair. The investigator explained it to me in a hallway outside a conference room, concisely and without apparent judgment. My wife had connected with my partner professionally before we were even married. The timeline was almost impressive in its patience. I stood in that hallway and processed the information the way you process something that rearranges everything you thought you understood about a period of your own life. Every good memory got a shadow attached to it. Every moment of feeling known and loved took on a different dimension. His sister found me later that afternoon. We were both at the field office, waiting to complete separate witness statements. She sat down next to me on a bench in a hallway that smelled like industrial carpet, and she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, I know it doesn't feel like enough. I said, "No. It kind of does, actually." She looked at me. "I wanted to understand it," I said. "I kept thinking there must be some version of this that makes sense, some logic that would make it feel less random. And now I have the whole map. I can see exactly how it was built. That's worth something." She was quiet again. Then she said, "My father never got that. He died not really knowing how it happened to him. I think that's why I kept going. I didn't have anything to say to that. I think sometimes there's nothing to say that isn't smaller than the truth, and the only honest response is to sit with someone in the weight of it." The indictment came down 6 weeks later. 41 counts between the two of them: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, filing false federal business documents, and obstruction of justice for the pressure applied to the earlier inquiry. The obstruction charge had teeth. It implicated a contact my partner had in a regulatory office who had made a phone call 18 months ago on his behalf. That person was named separately. The case spread wider than I had expected. The forensic accountant who had helped his sister was retained officially. The total amount identified across all fraudulent transactions was $618,000, significantly more than I had originally understood. Some of it dated back to the first year of our partnership. The company I thought I was building had been compromised almost from the beginning. My lawyer walked me through the timeline in her office on a Wednesday afternoon, pointing to dates on a chart. I watched the years I had worked hard accumulate on one side of the ledger while the amounts drained out on the other. It should have been devastating. Mostly it made me very tired and then, strangely, very focused. The company was salvageable. That mattered. The fraud had been significant, but the underlying business, the actual projects, the client relationships, the crew was real and healthy. I brought in a new bookkeeper and a new controller. I had a hard conversation with the clients I'd had the longest, the ones who deserved to hear from me directly. Most of them stayed. Some of them said they'd suspected something was off and were glad it was being addressed. A few left without much explanation, and I let them. I worked harder in those months than I had in years. Not to prove something. Just because the work was mine again in a way it hadn't fully been, and that felt like something worth protecting. His sister and I stayed in contact. Mostly practical things, updates from our respective lawyers, questions about the case timeline, the occasional document that needed reviewing. Once, she sent me a photograph of a job site in New Mexico, one of the places her brother had been before Beaumont, with a note that said the building had been finished correctly by someone else. Eventually. I looked at it for a long time. She drove down to Beaumont once, a few months after the indictment, to sign some paperwork related to the forensic accounting. We had lunch after. It was the first meal we'd had that wasn't in a diner at 9:30 at night with fraud documents between us, and it was surprisingly easy. She told me she was thinking about going back to school for something she'd put off for a long time. I told her about a warehouse project I was bidding on that would be the largest thing the company had ever built. Before she left, standing in the parking lot in November light, she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said I didn't. "That first night," she said, "when I showed up at your door. You had every reason to slam it in my face." I said, "You had every reason not to come." She thought about that. "I almost didn't," she said. 3 times in the car, I almost turned around. I told her I was glad she didn't. She nodded once and got in her car, and I watched her drive away and stood in the parking lot for a minute in the cold air, thinking about all the doors in this story and who opened them and why. My partner is awaiting sentencing. Based on the count structure and the obstruction charge, his attorney is reportedly negotiating a plea in the range of 12 to 15 years. My wife accepted a plea 5 years, with eligibility for reduction. Her lawyer argued she had been manipulated, which was true in certain ways and irrelevant in others. A jury can hold both things at once. A judge has to make a decision. I did not attend either hearing. I was on a job site both days, which was where I wanted to be. The company turned profitable again in the 6th month after the arrests. I kept the name my father's name because it was never about my partner. Not really. It was always about the work. The warehouses, the medical offices, the school renovations. Things that stand up, built correctly, for people who need them to. I still wake up sometimes at 4 in the morning, with that particular alertness that comes from a period of sustained threat, the body's way of checking whether the danger has passed. It takes a minute. Then I remember the sequence, the documents, the investigators, the indictment, the sentencing, and I think, yes, it has passed. The villa in Montenegro was real, as it turned out. One of the shell companies had purchased a vacation property there, small, on a hillside, with a view of the Adriatic. It had been purchased in my name, using my social security number, on a forged wire transfer authorization. The property is currently frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings. My lawyer says there's a reasonable chance I'll be entitled to a portion of the recovered value. I looked it up once, late at night in my kitchen with a glass of water I was actually drinking this time. It was beautiful in photographs. Stone walls, an olive tree in the courtyard, the sea impossibly blue in the distance. A place I had never been to that had been purchased in my name for a crime I didn't commit. I thought, someone should actually go there someday. Live in it honestly. Sit on that hillside with the sea in front of them and not owe anything to anyone and feel what that feels like. Maybe I'll be that person. Maybe I won't. But for the first time in longer than I can cleanly remember, the possibility feels like mine to decide.